All right. Well, welcome everybody to the Math and Computer Science Colloquium. This is our second speaker of the semester. And so I am excited to introduce Father Humbert, who is a mathematics professor in the Department of Computer Science and Mathematics at Providence College. And he will be talking about the World Series of Data, analyzing college baseball players on the way to major leagues. And this is research he's doing, and I believe he'll talk more about it, but he's also working with students. And so students have been involved in this research as well. So thank you, Father Humbert, and I look forward to hearing your talk.
Thank you, Kayla. So I've entitled this talk The World Series of Data because, of course, the World Series is going on right now, but it's more like data of the World Series. So it's not a competition on data, but it's the data of how to analyze the data of baseball, the sport which probably more than any other has the largest data set to work with. We've now had 150 major league seasons, and each season has hundreds of games, thousands in a normal season, of course. This season only had 898, but there's so many variables to deal with, so many players who get into the game, such a large sample size. So it's the sport that's probably that lends itself the most to sort of deep analysis and to the big data that's been trending in recent years. So what we want to do is how to help teams develop players and recruit players for the major leagues. So what is the problem? If you've ever seen the movie Moneyball or read the book, there's a scene that's dramatized in the movie where you have Brad Pitt playing Billy Beane meeting with a bunch of old school scouts, and they're talking about how to replace certain players that they can't afford to pay anymore on the Oakland A's roster. This is after the 2001 season. And they're saying, and some of the scouts are talking about players who were able to draw fans or players who have a good looking swing. And Billy Beane, played by Brad Pitt, is saying that they're not recognizing the problem. He says, what is the problem? The problem is they have to replace not just players who might look good when they play, but players who will produce on the field with skills that are undervalued. So at the time the book was written, it's players who can get on base. That's one of his catchphrases. He gets on base when he's talking about players. So you want to be able to identify these undervalued skills. And one of the major abilities that a scout or a front office manager would have to look for is to evaluate players who are coming through the pipeline. Players, say, in college, where they have a high level of competition, but it's not, but they haven't quite been seasoned to go into the major leagues yet. So they're looking at players they can draft, players they can recruit at the college level. Those are more reliable than, say, players straight out of high school, and more available than, say, international free agents. Because if you're a small market team like the Oakland A's or the Tampa Bay Rays, you'll need to rely on players from college where you have more of a sample size to work with. So our proposal is to look at a top-tier summer league for college players, the Cape Cod Baseball League, where there are multiple leagues where college players can play during the summertime, but the Cape League is probably the most prestigious of all of them. So by analyzing this league, we can identify players who would be more ready for the major leagues. We want to come up with an objective measure for evaluating players' talent based on his contributions to the game, based on the data that comes from actual in-game situations. So we've come up with a base model that I've called CWAR, for Cape Wins Above Replacement. And I've written about this model in the Baseball Research Journal for the Society for American Baseball Research. But over the past summer, I've been able to make some modifications to the model, and we can look at some further studies, like how can we look at, say, several years of data and compare them, and then compare how this model fits with some actual results we've seen in majors, namely this year's Major League Draft that took place in June, and see if this can predict Major League players' performance. based on how they did on the Cape. So that's an outline of where this talk is going. So the main task of statistics is how can we obtain meaning from data? We have a whole bunch of information. We want to find out what it means. And the main questions for statistical analysis in baseball: first, how can we build a team from the available players? That's the question going on in the front office in Moneyball. But also, how can we best manage that team during the game? You see, there's a lot of controversy now over old school versus new school management. You have to take your pitcher out of the game before he faces the lineup the third time. How do old school situations or strategies like bunting and stealing bases, are those still valuable in today's game? With 150 years of data, a lot of the common statistics are easily obtainable. We have resources like RetroSheet and BaseballReference.com that have the records of every major league game that's ever been played. And of course, baseball cards will collect a lot of the common statistics: batting average, home runs, RBIs. Sometimes even new statistics will show up. So here I'm using, this is Will Clark's card from Topps 1989. And in the 1980s, a commonly used statistic was game-winning RBI. It's not something we talk about anymore because it turned out not to be a very reliable statistic. If you want to measure a player's value, so how many wins can you attribute to a hitter? So how many times does he drive in the run that wins the game? So it could be a game-winning RBI if you say your team's down 3-2 in the late innings and the player hits a 2-run home run to give you the lead, and you keep that lead. But let's say if you win a game 16-0, whoever drives in the first run gets the game-winning RBI, even though it's not really a high-leverage situation. A lot of these statistics that you see on the baseball card don't give the whole picture. Batting average, the most commonly used statistic for hitters. It doesn't include getting on base via the walk. That's a valuable skill, and it was undervalued, which is why Billy Beane was able to find this hidden value. Batting average itself doesn't include walks. It doesn't include power hitting, extra bases. RBI, runs batted in. That's highly situationally dependent. Depends on the team, the lineup, situation in the game, and the scoring environment. So you can't really attribute RBI to the individual player. Same with wins for a pitcher. Back in the days when pitchers would pitch the entire game, and maybe every 3 or 4 days, say 100 years ago, or even longer than that, you can credit the team's win to the pitcher. But a win depends greatly on the pitcher's teammates. Does he get run support? Does his team actually score enough runs for him to win the game? Does he have good defense behind him? Or do you have someone like Jacob deGrom, who 2 years ago had a record of 10 wins and 10 losses, but was the best pitcher in the league, that he won the Cy Young Award? He had a very low earned run average, but even earned run average still reflects the defense, because if there's a fly ball that an outfielder can't get to and it's called a hit, that goes against the pitcher. But is it really the pitcher's fault? We also have to look at park factors. Sometimes a player might have more gaudy statistics because he's playing in a ballpark that favors hitters. Like, that's probably why Larry Walker, who played many years in Colorado, took a long time to get into the Hall of Fame, because people were arguing that his statistics were inflated because he played at a high altitude. So we have to find a more objective measure than even the statistics that show up on the baseball card. There are 2 different types of statistics we can examine: rate statistics and counting statistics. So counting stats, these are just the number of times an event happens. They're absolute frequencies. So how many times does this actually happen in a game? How many hits does a batter get? How many home runs does he hit? How many runs does he drive in? Or if you're looking at newer statistics, runs created is a counting stat. Likewise, wins above replacement, the measure that we're using. How many wins does the team stand to gain because this player is on the team? For pitching, strikeouts, wins, and innings pitched, these are all counting statistics as well, or saves for relief pitchers. Wins above replacement, again, also works for pitchers. But sometimes you want to look at rate statistics. So that denotes the number of events per occasion. So hits per at bat, times on base per plate appearance, strikeouts per inning, or per game, or standardized for a 9-inning game. So rate statistics are always relative frequencies, and they can give a better picture of what's most likely to happen in any game situation. So batting average, yes, that's a rate statistic. How likely is this player to get a hit? Or on-base percentage, or slugging percentage? How likely is this player to reach base? Or how many bases do you expect the player to get when he comes to bat? On-base plus slugging is a rate statistic. So that was commonly used. It still is used a lot. OPS. Sometimes you'll use that as an overall measure for the effectiveness of a hitter, although it turns out not to be weighted properly. So weighted on-base average is an improvement over on-base plus slugging, another rate statistic. Weighted runs created plus, this is a way to normalize runs created compared to the league average. So this is a way to compare, it's a rate statistic to compare a player to the rest of the league. For pitching, you have the good old-fashioned earned run average. How many runs are charged to the pitcher? How many runs score because of things the pitcher does and not because of errors in the field? Or walks plus hits per innings pitched, another stat from the 90s, along with OPS that I used back when I was doing stats for my high school baseball team. Or strikeouts per 9 innings, another rate statistic. Newer statistics are the fielding independent pitching. What are the events that the pitcher does, namely strikeouts, walks, and home runs allowed, that have nothing to do with the fielding or the defense behind them? So things you can attribute only to the pitcher. Or ERA plus is another normalization to the league average. So if we're looking for new measures, we have to deal with both counting statistics and rate statistics, because counting stats give overall contributions. The rate stats denote, say, the average strength of the player, what it's likely for this player to do, especially when it comes to something like weighted on base average. What's this player likely to do in the next time he comes to bat? What we eventually want to do, the ultimate goal, is to evaluate all of the players' contributions to the team with one number. We want to find which players are most valuable, but also which contributions are most valuable to the game. So in the scene in Moneyball, when the composite character Peter Brand is talking to Billy Bean, he says that the scouts are trying to, they're focused on buying players. But in order to build a winning team, you don't have to think of buying players, you have to buy wins. And in order to buy wins, you need to buy runs. So what we're doing is we're measuring the players' contributions in units of runs. How many runs in the game is this player likely to contribute? Because ultimately, the team with the most runs in the game wins. And then we can convert runs into units of wins based on the scoring environment in the league. A couple of reasons to turn this into a single number. First, you have to pay a player one number. You have to turn the player's value into some monetary value in order to give the player a contract. But also, if you're looking at the college level, there has to be a way for scouts to rank and evaluate prospects objectively, to see who are the best players at each position. So we need one number that comes up that summarizes all of the players' contributions to the team. And one way we would do this is by measuring the contributions in units of wins. So wins above replacement. How many games does a team expect to win because it has this player on the team, as opposed to a readily available replacement? So let's say in the major leagues, you have a star player who gets injured. You have to call somebody up from the minor leagues or trade for someone who's readily available. So how many more wins does the player who becomes injured, how many would you lose because you have to put a replacement player in? So that's sort of the negative way to think of it. Positive way would say, because you have this player on your team, how many more games do you expect to win? Because you have this player instead of, say, someone you can just call up from the minor leagues. Now, there are a few issues with wins above replacement, though. This is why we want to improve on it. So first, it's not often precise. It's imprecise, because if you're looking at different algorithms, and the two leading algorithms are from Baseball Reference and Fangraphs. These are both websites that keep track of baseball data, and they can often give projections, especially on Fangraphs. So look at a season like 2017, we want to find who led the majors in wins above replacement. Well, if you ask Baseball Reference, here's the top 5. Corey Kluber, a pitcher for the Cleveland Indians at the time, was the league leader. Aaron Judge of the Yankees, who won Rookie of the Year. Jose Altuve of the Astros, who won the MVP of the American League, was tied with Judge. Giancarlo Stanton, who was on the Miami Marlins at the time, won the MVP for the National League. And then Max Scherzer, pitcher for the Nationals, also up there. But if you ask Fangraphs, Aaron Judge was the runaway winner over Altuve. So Judge, according to Fangraphs, should have won the MVP. And in fact, he probably should have won the MVP anyway, because Jose Altuve had the benefit of the sign stealing that year. Plus, if you ask Fangraphs, Chris Sale was the most valuable pitcher with the Red Sox, ahead of Kluber. So the algorithms don't even agree with each other. So are there hidden variables that affect the way the data are being compiled? So that's the first issue. Second issue, it's wins above replacement. But what exactly is replacement? We have a sort of arbitrary baseline, and it's decided just so that the total wins above replacement for all of the major leagues for a full 162-game season turns out to be 1,000. I mean, it's a good, nice round number, but why 1,000 and not something else? Well, it turns out it does make sense, because a team of all replacement players would have a winning percentage of 294. They go 48 and 114. And that's close to the actual record of the worst team in the major leagues the past couple of full seasons. So that's arbitrary. Why don't we use something like league average? That's easier to calculate. It's more meaningful, but it's not practical, because you can't just call up a league average player from the minors. You're not going to get someone of that caliber. So to call someone up from the minors, that's going to be a player at replacement level. Another algorithm called the open war source says, okay, we'll define replacement level by everyone who's not one of the most common players who's on the roster spots. So there are 25 roster spots for 30 teams, 750 players. So those would be the everyday players, the ones who appear most commonly. And then everybody else would be replacement level. Of course, now you have roster expansion to set to 26 per team. And if you have a top player who's injured, then that player would be considered replacement level. So there's no easy way to find the baseline in major leagues. Third issue, now this is a strength and a weakness. WAR is context neutral. So you don't want to use something like win probability added, or RE24, which is the player's change in run expectancy based on what he does at the plate or on the mound. Because that favors players who have more opportunities to produce runs. So someone who bats fourth in the lineup on a strong team is more often going to have runners on base and is more likely to drive in more runs. So we need a weighting system that's independent of context. But if you want to measure a player's value, then you still have to take clutch performance into account somehow. So how does this player do in situations where there's a great opportunity to change the probability of his team winning? That's called the leverage, when you have a high possible change in win probability. And often the great closer, the great relief pitcher would be the most valuable player on a team, even though his wins above replacement are going to be lower than a starting pitcher because he pitches fewer innings. That's something we haven't completely solved, but we've definitely looked at the first two and found at least a resolution to the first two, and then a way to at least approach the third issue. So we want to use it for the Cape League. We can directly control hidden variables. So all the players are the same age. They're all college players. Most of them have just finished their sophomore year, although there are several exceptions, of course. But they're all in the same point in their careers. So a player who goes to college is not eligible to be drafted into the majors until after his junior year. So what will typically happen is a player may spend summer after his freshman year in a lower league somewhere else in the country. And sophomore year would be on the Cape, and then junior year would be drafted into the majors in June. This is the most prestigious league, so you have players who are all the same ability level. This is the top tier of all summer college leagues. But another variable we can control is the effects of travel. There are some summer leagues where players travel long distances. Like there's one league called the Northwoods League that stretches all the way from Indiana to North Dakota, although most of the teams are in Wisconsin and Minnesota. So if you play in Indiana one night and then you have to fly out to North Dakota, you're going to have some jet lag. You'll definitely feel the effects of having to travel. But on Cape Cod, all 10 teams are within a 45-minute drive of each other. It's easy for us to work with as well because the farthest park is less than 100 miles from Providence. And in fact, my Dominican community owns a retreat house on Cape Cod, right in the center of the Cape, so it's close to all the ballparks. So I've been able to use that house as a base of operations. And I even had some research students live on the Cape during the summer, and they've worked as interns for the league. Plus, we can get the data because I've talked with the official scorers for the league, Chris Thomas, who's the league statistician, and he's been able to provide play-by-play documents, not only the most recent season in 2019, but also the past 8, possibly even more. So what can we expect with the Cape League data? So there are 10 teams who play a season 44 games long. The top 8 teams make the playoff. So every series is best 2 out of 3. The biggest showcase event is the All-Star game in late July. There's a lower run scoring environment because the batters are using wooden bats for the first time often. I mean, some of them may have used it in another league the previous summer. So we expect a higher talent level for pitching. We have many major league scouts who go to the game, and they say that the level of competition is like AA in the minor leagues. So the second highest minor league has the same level of competition as this top tier college league. About 1 of every 6 major league players has played on the Cape at some point. And in the 2019 season, there were 330 major league players who were on the Cape at some point in their careers. So that's an all-time high. Most importantly for our methods, there's a built-in replacement level. So coaches are going to set their rosters the previous fall. So even now, the coaches of the Cape League teams are recruiting players for the upcoming season next summer. Now, many players still have to stay with their college teams if they advance to the College World Series, which doesn't end until the last week of June. Some players also leave earlier in the season, like after the All-Star game, in order to avoid injury. So what they need are temporary players who can take up spots on the roster, while the players who are on college teams that are still playing in their college season, or maybe playing for a junior national team, are not on the Cape. So we have temporary players, and we can identify them as replacement players. And the average performance of a temporary player can become our replacement level. That's our baseline for wins above replacement. So the software I've been using is RStudio because R is a computer language designed especially for large data sets, like our play-by-play database. It has many statistical functions built in as well. First step we want to do is calculate what's called the run expectancy matrix. This is based on empirical data. So we're looking for the expected value of the number of runs that the team at bat will score for the rest of the inning, given the state. So where are runners on base and how many outs are there? Once we have that, we look at the run value of each type of play. So each type of hit or walk or hit batter relative to an out. This gives us weighted on base average. Calculate that for position players and weighted runs created, which is based on it, and fielding independent pitching and wins per game above average for pitchers. These values, like weighted runs created per plate appearance for a batter and wins per game above average for a pitcher, give us replacement level. So we take the average of these rate statistics for each player in the database, find the replacement level, and then compare each player to replacement level and turn those into wins above replacement. So that's our algorithm for finding wins above replacement. So the next part of the talk, I want to walk through all the steps and share some of our results. Of course, anyone in my research class has seen this this diagram way too many times. I would often show it in lecture every single week. We have to start with run expectancy, which is the empirical probability of the number of runs scored the team at bat will score for the rest of the inning. This gives us the coefficients for linear weights. How much is a single worth? How much is a double worth? And so on. They go into weighted on base average. But we also have linear weights for base running. How many runs is it worth to steal a base? How many runs does it cost if the runner is caught stealing? We have to deal with park factors as well. How do the dimensions of the stadium affect the statistics we see? Look at defensive metrics as well. Those are a bit harder, so I'll mention that towards the end. We want to come up with a metric runs created that we can credit to each player. Fielding independent pitching, we want to find a way to measure what the pitcher contributes independent of the defense behind him. We work in leverage for clutch performance, and that's based on win probability, which of course is based on run expectancy. Make some adjustments for the league to compare them to league average, and then convert runs into wins, and that will give us the wins above replacement formula we're looking for. So all these ingredients come together. So we're following Fangraphs for the most part because they have the most transparent algorithm for calculating wins above replacement, especially for pitchers. Although, as we'll see, it turns out not to be the most reliable measurement for pitchers in the Cape League. So we want to define who's a temporary player. So if we use the College World Series and the All-Star game as sort of our benchmarks, so anyone who played only before players come back from the College World Series or after players left since the All-Star game. This is more reliable because a player who's given a temporary contract may have the contract extended for the whole season. Like there was a local player, Cody Pasek, who was a catcher for the Catuit Kettleers. I think he played Division III, was given a temporary contract, but then impressed the manager so well that he stayed on for the whole season and actually hit a home run in the All-Star game. So if someone's only on the roster during these times of the season, or who played less than 7 days, now you have a maximum of 40 plate appearances for batters or 40 batters faced for pitchers, 40 reflecting the average number of batters who come to the plate in a game. So that's sort of the maximum. Anyone who sees more action than this would be a regular player and not a temporary player. So the first thing we have to find is run expectancy. So we can think of the game as sort of like a Markov chain on these four-dimensional matrix where you have 3 bases, first, second, and third. Either there's a runner on that base or there isn't. And then the other dimension is the outs, 0, 1, or 2. So there are 24 possible states. So if you write this as 1, 1, 0, 2, it means you have runners on first base and second base. There's no runner on third. and there are 2 outs. The game can go and move along any of the 24 states plus the end of inning state. And each play would be an event that results in a change of state. So it could be a ball that's batted and hit into play. But you can also have, say, a wild pitch or a stolen base. That's a non-batted ball event, because if the runners move, or say runners caught stealing or picked off, then the number of outs changes, or the arrangement of runners changes. Or the number of runs scored can change. So if there's a run scored on the play, that's also a change of state. So what we want to find is the conditional expectation. How many runs does the team at bat expect to score given that state until the end of the inning? So with R, we calculate an empirical average from the season's data. So if we look at the raw data from the 2019 Cape League season over the course of 220 games, these are the average run expectancies. Notice that they tend to increase with more runners on base, but they decrease with more outs in the inning. At the start of the inning, you expect about half a run to score, but if you get the leadoff batter on, that's almost expecting that run to score. So what's wrong here? Well, the problem is, if you have a small sample size, some of these states might be out of order. So here, you have a higher run expectancy for runners on second and third only with nobody out than you do for the bases loaded. This is because there were some big innings. I think there's a 9-run inning that passed through the states second and third, nobody out, and that skewed the data to be too high. So with the larger sample, we can make it more reliable. So if you compare it to the major leagues from the same season, major leagues are a bit higher scoring, especially with 2 outs. And the Cape League has a smaller gap between runner on first only and runner on second only. That, it turns out, was just an anomaly from last season. So what we can do is buffer our values by averaging in 50 instances of the league average data from the past 8 seasons. Now we have all the states in the right order. We have a more sizable gap now between first base only and second base only. But notice that in the Cape League, it's a general trend that there are fewer runs scored with 2 outs than in the major leagues. So this is sort of the skeleton of the data. You expect about 0.54 runs to score at the start of each inning. Now we want to come up with the linear weights to calculate weighted on base average. So we want the mean run value for each type of event. So if we want the run value for a single, for example, we look at the run expectancy at final after the play minus the run expectancy initial so before the play happens. So final minus initial, then we add the number of runs that actually score on the play. So let's say if you had a runners on first and second with 1 out, run expectancy is 0.5809. The batter hits a single where the runner from second scores and the runner from first moves to third, then you increase, so you go from first and second to first and third, so 1.0375, that increases to 1.2974. But the run value is not just this difference. You also have to add 1 because a run scores on the play. So the actual run value of that single would be close to 1.26. That's very high. Another single, like if you have 2 outs and nobody on base, and then the batter hits a single, you only gain about 0.13 in run expectancy. You have to take the average of all of those singles to get the average run value for a single. Then we subtract the mean run value of an out to give the value relative to an out. That's how we find weighted on base average. But that's still not perfect because we want to put it on the same scale as regular on base average. So we have to multiply by a scaling constant that will make the league average weighted on base average, or WOBA, the same as the league average on base percentage. So the weighted on base average will be the sum of the number of each event, so say number of singles times the linear weight of each single, and sum over each type of event, and divide by the total number of plate appearances. And for the purpose of weighted on base average, an intentional walk does not count as a plate appearance, and neither does a sacrifice bunt, because in those situations, that's not a real confrontation between the batter and the pitcher. The batter's giving up his at-bats to advance the runners in a sacrifice bunt, or the pitcher is deciding not to face the batter by intentionally walking him. So those events don't count, but everything else does as a plate appearance. So we find the average run values from the Cape Cod League in 2019, and these are the average values. So a single is close to half a run. You saw a couple examples where it's only 0.13, another was 1.26, but on average, they'll be about half a run. But an out is worth -0.3 of a run. So if we take the average value of a single relative to an out, it'll be about 0.8. But in order to normalize it properly, to make the league average WOBA equal to the league average on base percentage, multiply it by the scaling constants, close to 1.2. So we have 0.9518 as a value of a single. This is very high compared to the major leagues. Usually a major league single is worth about 0.9. And triples in 2019 were also worth a lot for some reason. Some other things we have to consider: park factors. Does a player benefit from playing in one stadium over another? If you look at a team's runs they score at home versus on the road and make 100 the league average, then in the Cape League you have a wide range of park factors. The standard deviation is 9.21. The lowest of the past 10 years is Harwich, White House Field, which is by a high school, with an 85.2 park factor. Brewster is the Ultimate Hitters Park right behind an elementary school that was just built about 13 years ago. That has a 115.2. That's even higher than Yarmouth Dennis, which has a very shallow center field. So lower numbers are better for the pitchers, and Harwich actually uses this to build their teams. They like to stockpile pitching talent. Higher numbers favor hitters. So if we look at the player's average park factor, you average the park factor over all plate appearances, and that goes into the calculation for wins above replacement. You have a wide variety of field dimensions. So on the Cape, like there's one park in Orleans that's 434 feet to center field. That's deeper than every major league park, but it's only 300 to left field and 314 to right field. But you have other stadiums like Yarmouth Dennis, where it's only, I think, 350 to center field, or some are asymmetrical, like Chatham has a shorter right field fence. So we have to take these into account when we're trying to find a player's objective contributions. So these numbers turn out to be the replacement level, and runs per win. This actually comes in. Fangraphs has a formula, but I think there's a better way to find it using partial derivatives to find how many runs it takes to convert to a win. 10.359 is fairly high scoring. So if we look at the weighted on base average, this histogram gives the distribution of all the players from the 2019 season. So they seem to peak around the league average of 335, but you have a lot of players with a 0 weighted on base average because there's so many players who only came to bat a few times and didn't get on base at all. The highest possible we saw was 625, but out of players who had enough at bats, the league leader was 492, Nick Gonzalez, someone we'll talk about a bit later. Here's the formula for actually turning weighted on base average into wins above replacement. The first step is to get weighted runs above average. So we're going to turn WOBA into runs. So we subtract off the league average, the expected value, divide by the scaling constant, and multiply by plate appearances to turn this rate statistic of WOBA into a counting statistic, weighted runs above average. But you don't want league average. So if you add in the baseline of the league average runs per plate appearance, then here we add base running components. This gives weighted runs created. We compare this to replacement level now by including the park factor also to get weighted runs above average, runs above replacement. And then by dividing by the number of runs per win, then we get wins above replacement. So weighted on base average is our main statistic that we calculate for each player, and that turns into wins above replacement. For pitchers, it's different though. For pitchers, we're based on fielding independent pitching. So in contemporary baseball analysis, you may hear the phrase, the three true outcomes: walks, strikeouts, and home runs. So what does Aaron Judge do when he comes to the plate? It's one of these three. Well, the three true outcomes are the three possible outcomes of an at-bat that do not depend on the defense at all. Because any ball that's put into play has a chance of being caught or a chance of being dropped. So there could be a hit, it could be an out, it could be an error. But even the line between a hit and an out may depend on the defense's fielding abilities. But these don't depend on fielding at all. So the empirical values are you add 13 for each home run, add 3 for each walk, and subtract 2 for each strikeout. Then divide by the number of innings pitched. Then add a normalization constant to make this equal to the league average ERA. That's how you calculate the number of runs that a pitcher allows per game. You can convert this into wins per game above average using Fangraphs' formula, and that's how you find WAR for pitchers. So FIP, it correlates well with ERA, but it looks at the things that are only due to the pitcher. And in the version that we use, we count a pop-up caught by an infielder as the same as a strikeout because the net effect is the same. I think Fangraphs does the same thing. The net effect is the same because an out is recorded and the runners don't move anywhere. So now let's look at our results. Top 10 position players, we have one who's far and away above the rest, Nick Gonzalez, who led the league in weighted on base average, weighted runs created, and RE24. So that's the run expectancy. If you look at the difference in run expectancy from before and after each at bat of this player, he has the most. So about 20 runs in run expectancy alone. He was the league MVP, so no doubt there. Other players along the top 10 also won some awards at the end of the season. So this is sort of a qualitative way to compare our results with what happened in the league, seeing who won the awards. So Zach DeLoach had the highest batting average, but not the highest weighted on base average. Austin Wells was ranked as the best pro prospect. Some of these other names will show up on the draft from this summer. The best pitchers is a bit less correlation. And also notice that the wins above replacement numbers are lower. So Ian Bedell, who won the best award for the outstanding pitcher, did have the best pitching wins above replacement. I notice other pitchers had lower average, lower weighted on base average allowed, but they also didn't play the entire season. So WAR tends to reward players who played the full season. Logan Allen here had a better fielding independent pitching, but Bedell had more wins above replacement because he played the whole season. I noticed that not everyone in the top 10 made the all-league team. And the outstanding closer award went to Zachary Brixey, who only had a .07 wins above replacement. He had a very good ERA, but his fielding independent pitching was not as good. This is because he allowed only 2 runs in 10 innings the whole season, but both of those runs scored on solo home runs. And home runs are not good for fielding independent pitching. They had a +13. So if you use a different measure, you'll see that he was a more effective closer than WAR might give him credit for. Another quantitative way to test our results, not just with the awards, is to find the correlation coefficient between a team's aggregate wins above replacements, and you compare them to actual wins or actual winning percentage. So we have about a 0.86, which is fairly strong. We can actually do better. So here's the graph of a team's winning percentage and wins above replacements. Hyannis, our local team, the team closest to our retreat house, had a historically bad season. But notice how Cotuit won the league even though they only played 500 ball during the season. So they were actually a better team by wins above replacements than their record would have indicated. Wareham had the most wins above replacement, but came in second in their division behind Falmouth. Falmouth had an 11-game winning streak that year. So some teams overperformed their wins above replacement, other teams underperformed it. Our least squares line, the slope should be close to 1/44, so it's a bit high, but it's not statistically significantly higher. And our baseline, the intercept, this is very close to replacement level in the major leagues, the 0.294 you'd see in the majors. I have to speed up the rest of the talk, but some things we can add to the model, things we can modify. We haven't fully added base running or defense. So base running I've included as stolen bases and caught stealing only, but the metric used in the majors actually also gives credit for the runners taking extra bases on other plays. Like if you have a runner on second and a fly ball is caught by the outfielder, if the runner advances to third, then the base runner should get credit for that. But there's no, we can't measure that objectively with the data we have. Same with fielding. Fielding's difficult because you can see the value of an error, but errors don't tell the whole story. Does a player make a good play, like a stop on a ground ball that prevents the ball from going through to the infield, or if he makes an outstanding catch that prevents runs from scoring? How can we account for that? There's also, have not included a clutch factor, which may improve the correlation as well. So some modifications that we've made already. The pitching data don't correlate as well. So can we use weighted on base average that each pitcher allows rather than fielding independent pitching? This will actually turn out to be better for most seasons. Errors are assigned subjectively for fielding, but the best statistic, defensive runs saved, which the major leagues use, you need more information than we have. You need video footage, and you need the accurate location of each hit. One thing we can do, something I'm working on now, is we can add a player's range factor. That's a statistic that Bill James came up with in the 1970s that looks at how many times the fielder actually gets to the ball, or fielding runs. That's a sort of linear weights system derived by Pete Palmer and John Thorne in the 1980s that uses linear weights for putouts, assists, and errors that turns a player's defensive contributions into runs. So we don't have the best data available, but we can still use an older formula and work that in. So if we change the criterion for wins above replacement for pitching, notice that the WAR values also go higher, so there's more to be given around since the baseline gets lower. There's a bit of a shift here in the top 10 pitchers. 2 more all-league pitchers make the list who didn't before, and Rixey's WAR is now something that's comparable for the number of innings he pitched. But Bedell is still the best pitcher, so that doesn't change. If we change pitching wins above replacement to be based on WOBA rather than FIP, then our correlation coefficient goes up from 0.86 to 0.92. And if we take a convex combination of the two, maybe we can get something even better. That's something else we're working on now. can we improve the correlation with clutch performance? So some ideas we're looking at during the class were taking a Riemann-Stieltjes type integral, where you have the leverage index as you're integrating f dg. So leverage would be f, and then dg is the change in run expectancy. So plays that are, say, later in the game when you have a higher probability of changing the win probability, that would be worth more in the in our calculations. Or you can add a second order term where you look at some situation dependent term, but divide it by the square of the plate appearances, and possibly add that to that may improve the fit. So the last few minutes, I want to talk about data we've actually been able to work on from this year. So unfortunately, the Cape Cod Baseball League was not able to operate this past summer. The main difficulty was getting host families. So typically players live with families on the Cape. But there was a pop-up league that started in Newport with only 4 teams of college players. The players were all local, so they had to provide their own lodging and transportation to the games. They'd play 3 times a week for a few weeks during the summer. And I was able to look at the data from all of their games. You have an even smaller sample of only 37 games total. And the league tends to be higher scoring. So remember, with the Cape League last year, the base state had a run expectancy of 0.54, but here in Newport it was 0.59. There are also many more runs scored with 2 outs. So in the Cape, this was like a 0.08. Here's a 0.15. There are a lot of rallies that kept passing through the 1-out bases loaded state, so that's why this number is inflated. And these are somewhat erratic, like the rarer states with nobody out, but that's because the sample was too small and the data haven't been smoothed. So the sample may be too small to get any useful results, but we can at least see that here in the Newport League, the games were higher scoring, probably because pitching talent was thinner than you have on the Cape. Another thing I was able to do, even in the absence of new data, was to look at the past 8 seasons. We can compare whether the league was higher scoring or lower scoring from one year to the next. So in 2015, for example, you have a higher value where you have to multiply to get the linear weights to get to weighted on base average. So in 2015, that was lower scoring. The base state in the run expectancy, so at the beginning of an inning, you only expected, I think, 0.45 runs to score, as compared to 0.54 in 2019. The highest scoring year was actually the first one of the sample, 2012, when there was a change in the composition of the baseball. So some of the league historians refer to this as the juiced ball season. So that is the lowest scaling value, even lower than the high scoring years that we saw recently. If we look at who the best players were using wins above replacement from the past 8 years, Nick Gonzalez, the MVP last year, actually leads everybody from the past 8 seasons. Other players who have made the majors were also high up on the list. So Nick Senzel of the Cincinnati Reds came in second, 2.95. His statistics may not have been as good with the raw numbers, but remember, you're comparing them to league average. And on average, that was a lower scoring year. Bobby Dahlbeck, who had an impressive rookie season with the Red Sox this year, had the highest rate statistic, the highest weighted runs created plus of any player from that 8-year sample. And so we see there's some correlation there. He hit a home run in 5 consecutive games this year. Tony Kemp and Mike Ford also led in different categories: highest run expectancy added and highest weighted on base average, even though they didn't play an entire season. The best pitcher was Sean Manaea during that high scoring year. So even in the juice ball season, which probably boosts his WAR total, but he had an outstanding season. There was one game where he took a perfect game into the 8th inning when it was broken up by Aaron Judge, also a major leaguer now. And Kyle Freeland had an excellent season as well, who's now with the Colorado Rockies. But with pitching, there seems to be less of a correlation between the Cape and the majors. We've noticed that this modified WAR formula for pitchers correlates better in 7 out of the 8 seasons. On average, you have about an 86% correlation with the WOBA formula, rather than the 0.76 you get in using WAR 1 with fielding independent pitching. But another interesting graphic shows the change in replacement level from year to year. So in a higher scoring season, replacement level looks to be lower, or a team of all replacement players would have a lower record. So since a replacement level team has this high fluctuation from season to season, it does sort of call into question the reliability of using a replacement level based on temporary players. Maybe we need something more uniform. So one thing we can do, as I mentioned, in-game strategy, based on the values from the past 8 seasons, the league average run value for a stolen base is about 0.17 run. For caught stealing, negative 0.46. So you have a higher cost of being caught stealing. So the question is, what's the probability that you want for a stolen base? Like, how likely do you have to be to steal a base in order to make it worth it? So what you can do is look at the expected value, the expected run value from the stolen base. So your probability of success times the run value of a steal, plus the probability of a failure times the negative run value of being caught stealing. So if you want this to be greater than 0, then P has to be at least 0.7268. So you got to have a 73% chance of successfully stealing a base in order to make it worth trying it. So I use this when I play Stratomatic baseball. I want to only steal when I have a high enough chance of succeeding. So that's how in-game strategy can come from the data we've been using. So in the closing minutes, I want to look at data from the Major League Draft. So the #1 overall pick was the player who led the league in the 2018 season, Spencer Torkelson from Arizona State, who had the highest weighted on base average, the highest WAR from that season, and the highest weighted runs created plus, the best rate statistics. So that makes sense. Nick Gonzalez has an interesting story. So he played for New Mexico State. So lower level of conference competition, higher altitude. So people were saying that his statistics, like his high batting average and home runs, were inflated because of his run environment. But you put him on the Cape League, that equalizes him, and he still ends up becoming the league MVP. He has 2 clutch hits that lead the team to a championship. And he's rewarded for it by being the highest drafted player from last year's Cape League in this year's draft. The top pitcher drafted was Jared Schuster, 25th overall pick. And he did better in the modified WAR formula. Another interesting story, so the Houston Astros had the last pick in the draft, which was only 5 rounds. They choose Shea Whitcomb from Orleans, who had a better WAR value than Darren Baker, even though Darren Baker had a much higher batting average. But if you look at the analytics stats, you can see why they would pick Whitcomb. Of course, the Astros had another reason they may wanted to choose Darren Baker, namely that he's the manager's son. But instead, they pick a player with higher overall contributions rather than just batting average. If we tried to graph the relationship between wins above replacement and draft position, you expect a negative correlation because players who were drafted earlier should be ones with higher wins above replacement. But as we see from these graphs, the correlation is very weak. So with position players, R is about negative 0.31. For pitchers, it's about negative 0.16. So of course, you have to look at their actual performance in college rather than just on the Cape. But as the analysts were talking about during the draft, they said, especially with regard to players like Nick Gonzalez, performance on the Cape can boost the case for drafting a player early. You look at a few major league players. Kyle Lewis had a great season in 2015. He'll probably win the Rookie of the Year this year. But other Rookies of the Year didn't do as well in the Cape. Pete Alonso, for example, he set the record for most home runs by a rookie last year with 53. You know how many home runs he hit when he was on the Cape? 0. But of course, 2015 was the best year for pitchers in recent memory. Shane Bieber pitched that year, but only saw limited action, but he'll probably be the Cy Young Award winner this year. So maybe a player can bounce back from a sort of average season on the Cape. Walker Buehler, who'll be pitching on Friday night in the World Series, came to the team late, but only made 3 starts, has a low WAR value, but he pitched very well in the playoffs. So those contributions don't actually show up in these numbers. So what we can see, if we want to try to predict a player's major league performance based on the Cape, it's just one of many variables. But we can have some evaluation of natural talent, and that's one possible way we can project how a player will pan out later on. So one other thing I'm working at is a more comprehensive study of former Cape League players who've gone on to the majors. That's the end of the presentation. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions? You can either put it in the chat or just unmute yourself. I have one question. I'm just curious.
Sure.
So you said you interacted with the league and you're getting statistics from them. Do you share any of your analysis with them after you've looked at the data, or are they just kind of supplying you with data at this point?
I do give some analysis in some of the commentary. So I've talked with the league statistician. There's also sort of an independent analyst I've been talking with as well. And because I published the results from the original WOBA formula, or the original WAR formula, in the Baseball Research Journal. So that's, I actually have a copy in the student faculty room in room 217. If you want to take a look at it.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah. This is Rich Connolly. I've known the retired baseball coach at Springfield College since we were boys, since 1949. And he and I both commented very briefly about Mike Yastrzemski's journey to the major leagues. I think it took him 6 years out of Vanderbilt. And that seems very atypical to me, that somebody would see the potential and let him take that long to get through the system.
Well, there are other things at work. I mean, a player could be injured during the minor leagues, or it may run into some difficult competition along the way. Sometimes players just take longer to pan out. So right now we're looking at Kyle Lewis, who was a rookie for the Mariners this year. So this is 5 years after his Cape season. But Pete Alonso went into the majors last year, so it only took him 4 years to go through. Or Walker Buehler, I think, went 4 years from the Cape to the majors. But other players may take even longer. Depends on what sort of obstacles they may run into along the minors. So a lot of variables are at work. So one thing I'll try to do is take a cross section of players who took the same number of years to go from the Cape into the majors, because that might be a better level of comparison.
As a sidebar that might be interesting, in 2001, Cody Bellinger's father was called up by the Yankees.
Clay Bellinger, yeah, I remember him well.
And they rented a house in New Rochelle, New York, and I have roots there, in a neighborhood where my brother-in-law's family lives, and not far from where we lived. And we had a student, a very exceptional student, Janet Braunstein, now married, I forget her maiden name, with a PhD in math, faculty somewhere, and many in this seminar. There's quite a few who knew her, and she's a gifted tutor for us and very gifted with children. And the Bellingers were looking for somebody to take care of their 3 sons, they had 2 that were like 4, 3.5, and 5.5 or 6, and an infant. Everybody pointed to Janet. So Cody Bellinger's one of Cody Bellinger's child care providers is a Providence College alum, and her father is on the faculty of Iona. So under the consortium, she came to Providence, and well known to those who taught her. And just a sidebar, thank you.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of connections. Like one of my students is actually working on a documentary on the connection between Providence College and the Cape League. So the winningest coach in Cape League history, John Schiffner, attended PC in the 1970s, played baseball here, and coached for several years at Chatham. He's won 3 championships. And there have been players back when we had a baseball team, like Lou Merlone, who played through the Cape League and went into the majors as well.
Yeah, and John McDonald.
John McDonald was the most recent one, right? Got a World Series ring with the 2013 Red Sox. He's also the most recent player who's been traded for himself because he was the player to be named later in the trade.
Don't start that discussion. Who is the player that was traded to the Giants maybe in the 70s or 80s who was literally changing his name? So he was the player to be named later.
Yeah, I can't remember all of them. I think it's happened 4 times, but John McDonald was the most recent one.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Not. Thank you so much. I appreciate your talk, Father Humbert, and enjoyed it. Thank you for speaking in the colloquium. And we have one more colloquium this semester. I believe it's scheduled for November 5th. And that one, so that's a Thursday, and it will actually be a little bit later in the evening. I think it's 6 to 7 p.m. We'll send an announcement out about that because our speaker will be in California when he's giving his talk, a speaker from SpaceX. So hopefully we will see everybody there. And again, thank you, Father Humbert, for your talk today.
Thanks so much, Cal, for inviting me. All right. Good evening, everyone.
Bye-bye.